All right, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to Blackford Sports Network, home of your Blackford Bruins. Again, a huge thank you to all of our sponsors. I don't even can't even try to list them all off. There's so many of them at this time, but a few of them that have donated here in the recent weeks and months. A big thank you to Chris Smith from Smith Consulting. He donated what was going to be what he had paid for tickets for the regionals. He donated to Blackford Sports Network, and that money will go a long way, obviously. And a big thank you to Tony Ugan and Lisa Musselman. They sent a check as well for us helping out with the Winter Sports Awards banquets and the Spring Sports Awards banquet. And just want to give them a huge thank you for that, and we appreciate them just as much as they appreciate us. But I've been wanting to get this guy on, and you can't see him yet, and that there's a reason for that. But I've been wanting to get this guy on. I think we've talked about doing something together for probably almost a year now, and or at least since I started this podcast or this broadcasting gig. But this guy has been a friend since 2005 when I first started on the police department, and he is went a different way as well as I have went a different way. We're no longer cops anymore, but a huge shout out for, well, now I don't even know what to call you. Is it Jack? Is it Doug or JD Beckley?
I would say most people refer to me anymore as Jack or JD.
All right. I like JD better, so I'm going to call you JD
right.
for the rest of this podcast. And that's usually what I call you anyway, but
Right.
All right. So, hey, JD, how has this whole coronavirus or COVID thing affected you and your family?
Well, it's affected us in some manner, but I think it's affected other people a lot more. I still continue to work. Um, my job with the Attorney General's office and the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, we were equipped pretty well to be remote, not to be really at a central office necessarily. A lot of what we do is go into nursing homes and hospitals and investigate those doctors and nurses that are overprescribed narcotics or expose the Medicaid program to fraud, anything like that. So the biggest thing for us was we weren't really allowed in the nursing homes anymore because of that environment. And we just felt it best for us not to be in there, unless, of course, the residents were in extreme danger other than any type of virus necessarily. If they were being abused, neglected, sexually assaulted, obviously we would have to intervene along with law enforcement to investigate. But by and large, that's the biggest thing, where we weren't so much out in the field interviewing nurses and doctors and witnesses and patients. A lot of it's just dedicated to medical review charts and things of that nature. So as far as my work, it hasn't affected me too much or my family. We've been blessed so far. None of my family's been ill or has been infected with the virus at all. So we've been blessed and we've all been healthy, and I can't ask for anything more than that.
Yeah, it sounds like you do an important work over there for the state, and as a family member, my wife works at a nursing home, and I know she takes caring for her residents extremely seriously. So we've changed the way we do things in our house, to keep her residents safe and things of that nature. So we appreciate what you do when it comes to that kind of thing. So now, with that out of the way, let's get into the heart of who you are. What was your childhood like growing up in Hartford City? I can't say that because, and I love telling people this because it usually gets a real big reaction, but I didn't grow up here. So, I grew up in a completely different culture and a completely different place that seems like it's right next door to Blackford County. And it really is. But it seems like you guys had a lot of the same things, but there were some different things that you grew up. And you and I are about the same age, right?
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up for you here in Blackford County?
I can say I honestly loved my childhood. Um, I look back on it now, and I don't think I appreciated it as much as I should have as a kid. The small town atmosphere, and you see the TV shows and the big city where the action is. But uh, upon reflection, I loved it. The wiffle ball games, the tackle football in the front yard, just playing ditch 'em. I grew up on West Kickapoo in Hartford City, and there was never a shortage of kids my age. So while we played some video games and Nintendo was a thing for me as a kid, we didn't do it that often. We'd get up in the morning, and I've seen memes on Facebook where this was our social network, is to know where your friends were. You just look where the bikes were out front, and then you would know, oh, Brian's there. Okay, that's where Mike is. Okay, and you would congregate, and then when you get enough, the games would start, right? Okay, we divvy up the teams. We play the wiffle ball. We loved wiffle ball, had our home runs and out of bounds, and then come fall football. I live close to Sigma Phi Gamma Park, so we could sneak down there and play football and basketball and all that. So between all the sports and the running around and riding the dirt bikes and playing ditch 'em, fabulous childhood growing up. And I'm glad that my kids are here, and I think their experience is a little bit different, but I think they're happy as well because they have their friends. And when you've been here long enough, it's like, oh yeah, that's Steve's kid, right? And you just feel good that you know them, and that your kids have friends that you knew their parents or their grandparents. So I love growing up here in Hartford City, and Blackford County as a whole, and I can't imagine being anywhere else.
So you said you grew up on West Kickapoo. I'm sitting here on West Kickapoo right
Right.
now. Where was it that you were at on West Kickapoo?
615 West Kickapoo. So I know your house, right? I know where you live. And I remember when I moved down there, I was 8 years old, and that street there, Richmond, I couldn't go any further. That was my boundaries. Mom was very strict. And then I know when I got to be like 9, it was like I could creep up to Cherry Street. Um, and then when you get a little older, I could go up towards the highway, but don't cross the highway type thing. And then eventually everybody knows everybody, and there's the park, and no cell phone. So, I mean, you'd be gone all day.
Yeah.
You just knew that supper was here. And I remember your house. If I remember right, there was an older couple who lived there.
Bob and Carol Jones.
Yeah. And they'd wave, and they always liked the kids. And I'd say kids can be ornery, and I can't say that we weren't a little ornery, but we respected. There were some older people in the neighborhood. We didn't terrorize them. We didn't vandalize things. Our main job was either playing sports in the summer, or water balloon fights, or building ramps. Ramping bicycles was the end thing. Me and my buddy Brian, we would try to build ramps out of wood, and he'd get with his dad, and we'd just build ramps and hurt ourselves and skin our knees and laugh and all the things that come with childhood. And it was just a great time. It was a good neighborhood.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned building ramps. When I was a kid, we didn't have a ramp, but on the sidewalk right in front of our house, we had just a little bit of a hump, like a little 1-inch hump. And we used to hit that thing with our front tire and yank it up and try to ride a wheelie as long as we could.
Yeah.
And I remember riding this one wheelie so far that I got the back tire too far underneath the front tire, and my house had 2 great big maple trees right out front, and I smoked the second maple tree. And I mean, I hit it so hard, I didn't get up. I made my mom and my stepdad come out to make sure that I was okay. And I remember them saying, in no uncertain terms, because believe me, my parents weren't afraid to drop a few choice words, but they basically said, get up, you're fine, you're not dead, get back to riding your bike or go to bed. And so I remember getting up, getting back on my bike, and just a few minutes later, riding that wheelie right back down the road. So did you ever get to ride any wheelies like that?
Oh, I rode wheelies. I can't say that they were as good as what you're describing, but ramping was the thing, and we would go on hunts to find broken up sidewalks in the neighborhoods where, oh, right here, and just enough of an incline, you would try to ramp that as hard as you could. But again, it was just what we did, and it was terrific.
That's good stuff. So I know with childhood comes childhood sports. You mentioned wiffle ball, you mentioned football, but did you ever play it organized?
Oh yeah, I played t-ball back then. T-ball was a little ball diamond between the old Southside School and the Babe Ruth diamond. They shoved something in there real quick, and they threw up some old manholes from Hartford concrete were the dugouts. Threw some bags out there, and we played t-ball. Then you go to minor league when you're 8 and 9, and that was the field directly east of the Little League diamond, and that was pitch. That was when you started team pitch, and then of course 3 years of Little League, and then I just fell out of the baseball mood, and I didn't go on to play Babe Ruth, but played baseball up till I was 12, and then I played football from 9 years old up through high school. My senior year, I played football, and then I dabbled with track a little bit. So I always tried to stay busy with organized sports and wrestling. I wrestled in high school, played basketball in junior high, just a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
So you, the way you're portraying it, you didn't get very many offers to play football for colleges.
No, not at all. I joke with my friends that I don't know if there's anybody who ever worked as hard as I did for mediocrity in athletics. Uh, I I was average, right? I look back on it, and but I was went to school with some very outstanding athletes, so it would have been tough to outshine them, and I didn't. But I was average, and I had fun, and I stayed active, and I wish I'd wrestled sooner. I really enjoyed wrestling, and the physicality of that sport is intense. The practices, the mentality, the one-on-one combat, and I will say it's. I wrestled up to my senior year, and then I got into law enforcement right when I was 21. So that 3-year gap. But when I got into law enforcement, when you started doing the physical tactics, it was instinct. I never missed a beat. It was always, to me, it was a hold and go to the ground and hold them there. So to me, there was never any punches or boxing. To me, it was all leverage, and it was instinctive, and it resonated with me. And I wish I had started earlier, because I didn't start until my freshman year at high school, and it just happened. My cousin said, "Hey, come out and wrestle," because he'd wrestled a few years before that, and I was hesitant. I thought, wrestling, that ain't me. And my freshman year, I struggled. I'd never done it before, and I went 1-18, I think. Got pounded. I mean, just over and over, and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? But I didn't quit, and it bothered me that I was so bad. So I started working a little extra, and I started reading some books, and then I finally talked my parents into sending me to a wrestling clinic in Iowa. Iowa was like the college wrestling Graceland. Dan Gable was the coach. Dan Gable was a legend in collegiate and Olympic wrestling. And I went with my buddy Aaron Hatton and Brian Ridgway. They were also wrestlers. And so we all went to Iowa. We went to the Field of Dreams. That was part of the little side thing. It was kind of neat. So we actually sat in the bleachers and walked the field. But the important thing was that clinic unbelievably made me better. And my sophomore year, I started wrestling on varsity and winning more. And it was then when you start winning, it's really fun. And by the time I graduated, I was doing pretty good, and I wasn't really my wins weren't decisions. I was pinning my opponents. And I look back on it and think, man, if only I'd started sooner, where would I have been? And then I never got lucky. It seems like on sectional pairings, um, it seemed like the guy I would get beat in sectional would go on to get runner up in the state or something like that. So I never got past sectional, but didn't matter. I enjoyed it. It's just one of the many things that the organized sports that I did.
That's the way it always works out. You can't win your way out of your sectional pairing. If you're going to win, you're going to win. You're going to keep going. But sometimes the cards just don't fall in our favor, and we end up drawing the toughest opponent. Which has happened to Blackford a lot here in the past, and just when we were starting to get some momentum going, obviously we hit the COVID, and the rest is history. But you've already touched on it a little bit about your adulthood and the things that you've done in adulthood. You obviously became a cop at 21. So what did you do from 18 to 21?
I was at Indiana University in Bloomington. I'd always been of the mind and attracted to law enforcement. I really enjoyed I don't want to sound like a cliche, but it's a position that I thought it was neat to be the go-to guy. When you're in trouble, you call the police. And going through high school, some of the people that I respected greatly were Hartford City cops. Your Steve Comfers, Kevin Mahans, Steve Chaney's. All these guys were Bruins, and I watched them play Bruin football, and I knew them. And then they were Hartford City cops, and they talked very well of being a cop. And to me, I liked that. But I went to college, and it was fine, but I was still always attracted to that law enforcement thing. It was always there. And then it just so happened that Paul Weitzel was elected sheriff, and Kevin Mahan was the chief deputy. And I had known Kevin. I knew who Paul was, and I was still interested. And I made a phone call and said, hey, what's it all about? And they offered like a ride-along program. And I did that summer, and I was hooked. So I said, this is it. So I started doing what I needed to do, and they hired me. I started in the old jail uptown for $6.93 an hour. And back then it was jailers worked a 5-2, and my days off every week was Tuesday and Wednesday, every week. But I didn't complain. I wasn't making money. I just said, this is what you got to do to earn it. And to me, I was going to earn it. And if it's starting there making $13,000 a year with really not very good insurance back then, but I was hooked, and I worked third shift, and I would come in on second shift and ride along with the road deputy, ride along with them and watch and learn and see how they handle things. And so, working basically 2 shifts, and then we transitioned to the jail there is now. So they hired a bunch of new jailers, because back then there was only 5 of us that worked at the old jail. So they had to hire new staff. So then I was kind of on the ground floor helping train, and it was a big difference from the old jail to the new jail. But it was good to be there. And then you got a well-rounded education, because you also had to learn how to be a dispatcher, because they had dual responsibilities at the old jail. So when it goes to the new jail, they kind of took over it became central dispatch. So they kind of dual trained you, right? You may have to do dispatch, you may have to do jail. I did both, kind of floated in between them. And then even by that time, I was out working as a reserve deputy sheriff. So I may work second shift on the road, come in and work dispatch that night. I was still doing that because um, that's what I wanted to do, and I was going to put the work in to get there. And then I was hired on Hartford City, and then that's where I was when I left, and I enjoyed my time with the Hartford City Police Department. Um, and again, I it's a noble job. I still believe that. I know there's some issues out there. I know we've all talked about it, um, and I hope it's dealt with. But by and large, it is a noble profession, and I really hope that it reaches a point where the good cops get outshined by the bad.
Yeah, very true. You know, that a truer statement couldn't be made with the bad cops outshining the good cops. And it's just sad that that's the way things have worked out in our society here lately. But that's not why I brought you on here. I didn't want to talk cops or anything like that. But I noticed that because we worked together from 2005 to I think I left in 2010 or 11. But I noticed that you started getting more involved or more into politics, during that time while I was there working with you. What was it about politics that got you interested?
The best thing I can tell people when they ask me that is I learned at a relatively young age that um, you'd better get involved in politics or have something to do with politics because politics will always have something to do with you. So you can't avoid it. There's office politics, there's family politics, and then there's the politics that we're all familiar with. I get told that a lot. I just don't want anything to do with it. It's all dirty, and I get it. I completely understand that. But to not have anything to do with it to me just didn't sit right, and that's not how I'm wired. And like I said, I just decided that I was going to be involved because politics will always be involved with me. If I can be involved and help and do good, then I'm going to do that. And I just remember distinctly, I voted as soon as I could. I turned 18 in August of 1992, and that was a presidential election year. And I come from a very Democrat family, both sides, mom and dad's side. And I voted for Bill Clinton. Republican was a dirty word in my house growing up. I remember being a kid and Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist. You don't talk about Ronald Reagan. And it always intrigued me, even as a 10, 11-year-old kid. What's so bad about Ronald Reagan? My dad hates Ronald Reagan. What did Ronald Reagan do that my dad hates? And it's just because that's how he was raised. My grandpa was a big Democrat. My grandpa actually ran for sheriff in 1958. He was on the Democrat ticket. And as it's always said, Blackford County has always been a Democrat county. That's always been said, and it's always been pretty true. It was rare for a Republican to get elected, and that just goes back to the founding of the county, which I don't know if we're going to get into, but nonetheless, that election year, oddly enough, I'll be quick, my grandpa was one of, I think, 12 people running for sheriff in Blackford County just on the Democrat ticket. I mean, that's how big it was. And I think he got third, right? He didn't get it. But he was involved with it, and he was involved with the local Democrat Party all through the remainder of the 50s, 60s, and maybe briefly into the 70s, but then he got out of it for whatever reason. So I said all that to say this. I've always kind of been like, yeah, what's going on with the politics? So I was curious, and of course, then I voted for Bill Clinton in 92. And I kind of followed it along, and then along comes 96, and I gave Ross Perot a more in-depth look than I had in 92, because I thought a lot of what Ross Perot said made sense to me as a kid, right? 21-year-old kid. But there was still something there, and that was kind of reaching a crossroads where am I going to vote? And at the time, I voted for Bill Clinton again, and I couldn't regret those votes more. But hey, it is what it is. I voted for him twice. The 2000 election is probably where it really turned for me. I really, really read magazine articles and followed on the issues, and where I'm becoming aware of me. What do I actually believe in? What are the issues that are important to me? And I was comparing and contrasting. What does Al Gore stand for? What does George Bush stand for? And I had a little bit of problem with the Bush dynasty thing, granted, but I put that aside, and as I'm talented in my head, I'm conservative. I'm not a Democrat. It didn't make sense to me. Um, I would debate with my dad on some things, and I would say, well, what about this? But he'd always default back and say, well, you just can't vote for the Republican. And I ultimately, I would say that was the turning point where I was undoubtedly a conservative. And if you're a conservative, it's really hard to vote for the Democrat. And of course, my grandpa, my mom's dad, Fred, had a fit. He was an old boy, Southern Democrat. He just couldn't fathom I voted for that. But I did, and it made for some interesting talks at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But we were always respectful, and that's probably where I kind of got into enjoying the debate and the discussion. I enjoy the engagement. I try not to be rude or vile or spew hate. But here's what I believe and why I believe it. I think that's important, and maybe that's where we're losing that today, that the civility is gone. I think we can agree to disagree. And I hold nothing personal. People disagree with my policies or my politics, but that's for me when it started, to get involved. And again, kind of like what I said, it's get involved because it will get involved with you. So.
Right. And it's funny because you and I take completely different paths to get to where we are today. I turned 18, couldn't care. I didn't care about politics, didn't want to hear any of it, but there was something that was going on after 9/11 that that got me thinking about things. You know, I'd heard the conspiracy theories that George Bush is the one who exploded the towers, and you know, I kind of got sucked into that. If I would have voted, I loved Bill Clinton. I thought he was a great guy, and the only reason I would have voted for him was because he could play the saxophone, and he was on all the TV shows that I like to watch. And the older I got, it wasn't until I became a cop that I decided to start thinking about politics, because I think it was you that told me that, because that statement that you said about, you know, politics are going to come to you. If you don't go to politics or move to politics, politics will move to you. It resonated with me, and it was the 2008 election that I was like, all right, I'm going to really look into this election and pick which side I want to be a part of, and to stay away from what side I'm actually on, which I mean people probably already know anyway. But there was just something about the politics that I was like, wow, this is insane. And it was fun, and I enjoyed making my way to the ballot box to cast my vote. You know, I felt for some reason I felt important when I was walking into that place and casting my vote for who I wanted to be, city, state, county, and all of that. And that's why I started looking into it. And I think you are partly the reason that I looked into it a little bit more. Now, obviously, when I first got into it, I wasn't as cordial and as nice as you are, or as eloquent as you put them. But you know, hey, I'm at a completely different place now than I was back then, and I look at politics even more different. Like I don't see them the same as I did back in 2008, and it's just crazy how much we evolve and how much we want the politicians to help us personally. And but you know, that's neither here nor there. One thing that you mentioned that I think is going to be a good segue is you said your grandpa was a sheriff's candidate in the 1950s, which is part of Blackford County history and Hartford City history. And you have been doing these local history posts on your Facebook page. And if anybody hasn't been able to go search these out, you need to go find JD Beckley on Facebook and start reading some of these local history posts. In the beginning, you had this one guy that you were following who kept getting in trouble, and I can't remember his name, but the way you presented the story was just fantastic. But what made you get into local history like you did, and get into these daily history posts?
Well, my fascination with history goes back to when I was a kid. I remember in fourth grade, they actually taught, and that was part of the curriculum, like Indiana history. And I remember being taught that, and I was fascinated with the Indians, right, who would come here in Indiana, what tribes were prevalent and around. And I really got into that, and I always enjoyed history and reading the books. And to me, it was important to understand where we had come from. And I think the statement can't be more true, is if we don't understand history, we're destined to repeat it. And I think more people should read history, because there's a lot of things going on today that don't have to be a mystery, right? We're not going into the darkness because this happened in such and such country in 1922. This happened in such and such country in 1789. So once you get the understanding of that, I thought it was important. So the internet, for all its good, has its bads, but I wanted to turn the good into the research. Probably the best benefit of the internet, and don't quote me, but I think the reason why the internet was invented was for academia and research, to search books. You can search and get more information now in 15 minutes that 100 years ago would have taken you days and weeks to compile. Now it's at your fingertips. And if you hit the right spots, you can get a lot of good information. So I enjoyed the history part of it. So then, having been born and raised in Blackford County, Hartford City, I got interested in where we came from. Well, what started it here, and make it more local. So then you start researching it, and you come upon these stories. And here a few weeks ago, I kind of gave a shout out and a tribute to Cecil Beeson. Cecil Beeson's a legend in Blackford County for his love and passion of history. And he kept a lot of it alive. And if it weren't for him, we wouldn't have a lot of things we have today. And I thought he deserved a little bit of recognition for that. But what I haven't got to yet, and I was planning on in the future, is the guy before him. A lot of the information that I get from our Genesis up to contemporary times comes from a guy named Benjamin Shin. Benjamin Shin compiled a history book of Blackford and Jay counties, and a lot of the information he got was from a book published in 1887 for Blackford and Jay counties, memoirs and things like that. But Benjamin Shin took that and added some things to it and published a book of his own, and it was published in 1900. So 1900 is kind of the watermark to where he was able to kind of account for all the stories that he had heard. And he was at a point where he could maybe talk to some kids of the pioneers that were still here and get some of those stories, and he put it together. So if it weren't for Benjamin Granville Shin, a lot of that would have been lost. So he deserves huge accolades for archiving and recording that. So you go to the book, and it's free. Google Book. It's an ebook. You can get it, read it at your leisure. And I've encouraged anybody who's asked me, "How you doing this?" Go there and read that book. It's fascinating. And he starts with the beginning because he can recount those. And it kind of starts with the Miami Indians, which goes back to my love of Indians. Of course, the Miamis were here. And we're just north of the Delaware tribes and the Lenape tribes. And then, of course, the European settlers started coming in, and there was really no stopping it. And they finally got to Blackford County. So I just started following that, and I couldn't get enough of it. And who was here first? And I get lost in thought on hearing them describe this. So you think of what you know of Blackford now, a lot of plush fields and corn, and it wasn't anything like that. They had black bears, they had wolves. Wolves were one of the very first nemesis that the county commissioners had to address when they created this county. They actually had to send bounties on these scalps. So people made a living going out killing wolves because that was a major issue of the day. So that just fascinated me, and I could just get more of that. And then with social media, I thought, there's a lot of negativity on social media. Let's try to make this a little positive. So, hey, I started sharing it, and it caught on. And I realized that there is a lot of people who have the same love and passion for history and local history. And it encouraged me even more that, hey, all right, let's start sharing some more. And so I started sharing some more. And then you just start doing more research, and you find old pictures. And it's human nature. We love pictures. We love it. We love seeing it. Oh my gosh. And then it gets involved in genealogy. Where do I come from? So then I start trying to do that some more. And the DNA testing, I've done it. And how you try to trick your family and what brought me here to Blackford County. And you try to trace that back. And then you talk to older family members, and they go, "Oh, you know what? I have a picture of your great grandma." And so I've got pictures of my great grandma in 1915, with her arm around her brother, Frank Everhart, on the courthouse lawn. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, look at that. You can see
That's
the
over
courthouse.
100 years old.
Over 100 years old. And there's the Hotel Ingram, the Hartford Hotel's right there. It kind of looks the same, but it was it was like the hub. That was where everything was downtown, and just old pictures. So then when you start putting those pictures out, and then other people would say, hey, I've got this picture of my great uncle. So then they start sharing, and it just adds on. And it's something that I love doing, and I love the fact that other people like it too.
So do you know who Ed Cook is?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I know he's on Facebook. I don't know him personally, but I know he puts out a ton of pictures.
So I do have the right name then.
Yeah, that's the guy. And he shared a lot of the pictures that I've put out.
Yeah.
But he's another example of, he's got a lot of pictures that it's like, wow, how did he get those pictures? It's interesting, and I'm glad that he's sharing them and that people are enjoying it. At least I think they are.
Yeah. So where did you come from?
Oh, English Irish.
No way that you're Irish.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it made the way it sounds, and they're apparently, I'm getting notified they're getting a little more accurate on the tests, but it sounds predominantly, which this is interesting. I was kind of hesitant at first because they said it was kind of like a Scots English part of it, but then it came back and said there was some Viking, basic Scandinavian. So I start doing some more research, and where that part of England, during the time frame I'm looking at, was invaded by the Vikings, and they controlled those coastal regions for like 200 years. So
Uh,
I got some Viking blood in there, but then the Irish side really was predominant too.
so does that now make you want to be a Minnesota Vikings fan instead of a Cowboys fan?
Not at all. Nope.
All right. So, hey, you said Bears and Wolves in Hartford City.
Yeah, Black Bear. Yeah.
Bears and Wolves.
Wolves, yes.
So I'm guessing that because we populated this area, we killed off all the bear population because the bear population was trying to kill off our younglings.
From what I've gathered, the Bears weren't really the problem. I think they just probably left. But the Wolves were apparently a real big problem, and the county commissioners established a pretty good chunk of money for back in the day for each wolf hide that you'd bring in and get paid for.
Oh wow! So
So,
you also said you were trying to. Oh, go ahead. You're getting ready to say something.
well, just that it's hard to imagine how it was back then with the old roads and the old dirt streets and just the horses clopping down the mud road, and um, it's just hard to imagine, but that's part of the fun of it, right? Is imagining. Oh my gosh.
That's my favorite part of history. I just read one of your recent posts about the. I think it was about. No, it wasn't about the courthouse. There was one just before that, and they had mentioned bears. This area being populated with bears, and that each neighbor, their closest neighbor was miles apart. And I just try to think back. I don't remember the year, but I think it was like 1850s, somewhere in there, when these people were coming into this area. And you have to. It makes you wonder. Okay, where were these first original houses? What plots of land were they on? And it said that it was plush with trees, well, forestry, and that to get to each other's house, they had to walk through the forest to get there, and that they would only come when they were raising a house or something else, and I don't remember what it was. But you just wonder. You sit and you wonder. All right, where's my house in the grand scheme of this area that they're talking about? And what would it be like for me to live out in this desolate, swampy, forested area where the only mode of travel is this path that chances are I've cut down with an axe so that I could get to my closest friend, which was probably like, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hour ride on a horse through this swampy forest. And then what kind of party would we be having when we actually, if you and I had met up, what would when we raised this house, well, it seemed like everybody was friendly. If you moved into the area and you wanted to settle the area, they were like, "Yep, let me know, and I'll come over and we'll raise this house in a day," and you would have this family home that you could live in. So that's the fun part of history for me is actually just putting myself into those stories. But who was here first?
Well, that we know of, it was the Miami Indians. I don't think they really lived here. They passed through back and forth, or at least that's the way I understand it. The first recorded settler was the Reasoner family over towards Lick Creek. In the over here in the southwestern part of the county. And then a year or two later is when I think the Baldwin clan kind of came in from up in the other catty corner up towards the Montpelier area, and started developing that along the Salamone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. I forgot the Salamone was even up there. So, of all these stories that you have researched, what's your favorite story that you've come across?
Hmm. Um, you know, that's a really tough one as far as favorite.
What's one that you can recite by memory?
Oh Lord. I guess it kind of depends on what you're interested in. The like Matamoros was probably the first little actual community in Blackford County. And Montpelier was actually the first platted city. It actually beat Hartford City, but there was more people coming up this direction, and we're kind of congregating around Hartford, which kind of bolstered the population a little bit. Um, but as far as favorite stories, there's just a ton of them. I guess it just depends on what you're interested in.
Well,
If you talk about memorable, there was a huge riot on the square during the Civil War. They
all
actually
right,
had to.
let's hear it.
Well, back the war wasn't very popular, and actually in Blackford County, it was a very sympathetic to the Confederacy. It wasn't a very friendly location for the Union. And when the Union came to recruit and to draft, it wasn't well received at all. And there was a big riot, and some of the boxes were thrown, and I can't remember the guy's name, but they ended up having to call in the National Guard to quell it, because it was such a hot topic issue, and Hartford City got a little notoriety for that in the news.
Oh, wow. I see. I didn't know that about it. Now,
Yeah, I wish I knew more of the guy's name, but it's one of the things I've posted that I found interesting, and of course, a fascinating book is Grave Matters. It's available through the Blackford County Historical Society. There's some great stories in there about some murders that happened in Blackford County, and really gets you to thinking. Um, the it's just good reading, and it's well worth the money, and it helps support the society.
so the last I knew, there was only one unsolved murder in Blackford County, and I know that you have always taken a very hard look at it. I remember watching you and Matt and Eric sitting back in the detective's room with whiteboards full of this and that and facts of the case and stuff like that. Are there any other cases in Blackford County that were never solved that were maybe high profile?
Yeah. You kind of catch me off, but yeah, there's a story of a guy who disappeared, and they found his body in an old fence row several years later. um, there was out in Trenton, there was a murder of a soldier who'd come home and was walking home back to Portland, but he was murdered by some people in Trenton, who didn't really care for him being a Union soldier. Um,
Oh,
uh, that's there are some, yeah, but the one you're talking to is probably the most recent unsolved. Um, I think I know who did it. I'm pretty confident in who I say did it, but it doesn't matter what I think, and I don't know if the evidence will ever be there. But I still I still hold hope for that, because that was a pretty interesting case too. You're right. We put a lot of time and effort into that, as did all of the detectives when it happened. Um, it's a complicated case.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, I remember you guys breaking everything out and showing and having everything written out, and I want to say that it was like a solid year that you would come back, and like on a daily basis, I would come in on second shift, or even come in on day shift or on my day off, and you three would be sitting there talking about that particular case, and you know, where the evidence was taking you, and what steps you needed to take next, or if there was anything that you can be doing. But is there anything else that you wanted to add in?
Well, I say that I'm pretty confident who it is, and I can't really get into that. But I will say it's no one from Blackford County. The two people who did that were not from Blackford County. If that helps people.
No, I was meaning just in the overall general scheme of today's interview with you, because I know you and I have talked about doing a local history or even just a history in general type of broadcast. So before I wanted to get into that with you, was there anything that you wanted to add in?
Oh, I think I'm good. If you're going to segue into us doing something, I'd be interested in seeing if the interest is there, on a podcast, and I don't think we'd have any issues coming up with topics to talk about. And I talked to you before. I think we could do that. And one thing I've always been interested um, is our war stories. And I'm fascinated by the ordinary average person being caught in extraordinary circumstances and rises to the occasion and does extraordinary things. Those stories are just fascinating to me, about just some guy who didn't know what to do, joins the Marines, develops into that, and then is eventually put in a situation that we could never comprehend, and does something remarkable. And there's all types of those stories that fascinate me as well, that could go along in that. But I would be interested to see if there is interest in us doing something like that, a history podcast. There's a ton of them out there. I get it. I understand it. But if it's something that they like to see us do, I'd be interested in doing something like that. If you got all the toys.
I do have all the toys, but it's up to the subscribers and to the listeners and to the viewers whether they want to see something like that. So I'm with you. I love old war history, and you know, there's 1,000 podcasts out there that talk about history, or talk about war heroes and stuff like that. But I don't think there's anything out there that talks about it the way you're talking about it. And I personally would enjoy something like that. So if the viewers are interested in that, and we'll share this to our Facebook page, we'll share it to the BSN YouTube page. If you think that you would enjoy a broadcast like that, give us a like, give us a comment on any one of the platforms. JD, you'll share it on your Facebook page as well. Get a hold of him on his Facebook page, and if we get enough viewers, that people that will actually watch it, because, you know, we don't want to waste an hour. I mean, I've already kept you here for a little over an hour now, but you know, we don't want to waste, you know, hours, you know, writing out an outline and getting everything set up, because the equipment's not easy to set up, right? You've seen it.
I've seen it. Yeah.
So we're talking about, it would probably be a 2.5-hour ordeal, if not a 3-hour ordeal. So if nobody's going to watch it, then that would just be us throwing 3 hours of our time out the window And we could best be serving that by researching more of those dedicated warriors who have done extraordinary things, like Gunnery Sergeant Basilone, John Lejeune, just to name a few that I know of. Chesty Puller, of course.
Oh, of course. Of course you
Gotta have
bring up
Chesty.
Fuller.
But anyway, I mean, I love reading up on those guys, and I believe I told you I had started researching for something like that, but then just got busy with life and things like that. So if you guys want to hear it, we'll be willing to give our sides of it and give the stories of those hard charging, motivating devil dogs, or those soldiers who have done extraordinary things. I mean, like I say, that even with the current conflicts that are going on, there's some extraordinary things that those guys have done. Oh man, and I can't remember his name. Kyle Carpenter, who jumps on a grenade without any fear for his own life. I remember listening to a podcast that he had done on one of them that I listened to quite a bit, where he just jumps on this grenade because he knew that his buddy had a wife and kids. And you're talking about, once you see a grenade, you literally have seconds. And he said that he knew that his buddy, who was a Lance Corporal as well, had a family, he had a wife, he had a kid that was either on the way, and he didn't want that family to go without him being a father. So he jumps on this grenade, it blows him up, and he survives. He's a Medal of Honor recipient, and just an all-around great guy. And then there's some others who have done crazy things, and none of them actually feel like they deserved what the awards that they were given. But when you sit back and you look and you listen to the things that they've done, you're like, yeah, an award is the least we can do, or the least that we can give you. You deserve so much more, but they just think it was part of their job. And so I would love to get into more and talk about stories like that, and put ourselves in those situations. So like I said, if anybody wants to listen to something like that, I'm always up for it. So give us your thoughts and let us know what you think.
And
JD,
I think we could also add the local history flair to it. There's no need for us to go nationwide, right? But if we can entertain people who have a connection to Blackford County, hey, then let's offer up what we can, because something I've traveled a lot in my life, and it's always amazed me that it seems like you're not far from Blackford County. Somebody be like, oh, I know so-and-so from Montpelier, or, hey, do you know this guy? I think he grew up in Hartford City. And I've heard those conversations all over the state. And that always kind of interests me, that as small as Blackford County is, it seems like we're always out there.
Well, I mean, we just did a broadcast. Chris Landis started getting bored at home, so he's doing some interviews for us as well. And he just had Mark Cutshaw, who lives in Texas and works on the Starliner spacecraft or something to that effect. I don't remember the exact name of it, but he programmed the cameras that were used, and had to sit there and watch 18 hours of video. And I thought that was interesting. And Chris asked me later on, he was like, so how do you think I did? And I was like, well, I mean, I probably would have asked more dumb questions like, hey, did you see any aliens on that on your videos that you watched? And we kind of got a laugh out of it, and moved on. But I'm all for keeping it Blackford County, because I'm sure there's a couple monuments up on the courthouse that have names of soldiers who died in certain conflicts or wars that had their name and were obviously from Blackford County. So I'm always for that aspect as well.
I will say this, and we can wrap it up, but I did want to kind of end with keeping it local. And one thing I know I didn't appreciate as a kid was those who had come from Blackford County. And I spoke to the Bruin football team a few years ago when I was an assistant coach out there at the high school. Coach Ranker would always have a Thursday pregame speech where somebody would come in and talk about being a Bruin and how important it is. And he asked me to do it one Thursday, and it really got me to thinking. And I found it easy when I was a kid to kind of be dismissive of Blackford County. Is, oh yeah, if you made a mistake, it was pretty common for not just me, but a lot of people be like, oh, I went to Blackford, and then you'd laugh it off. And but the older I got, I came to kind of realize that it's kind of a very wrong-headed attitude. So then preparing for that little speech I gave, that if you really think about it, there's been some terrific minds and people that have come from Blackford County. There's only been a few hundred people in the history of mankind that have been in space. One of them ate lunch and walked the halls right out here at Blackford High School, Kevin Ford. That's fascinating to me. We've had lawyers, judges, state politicians, all walk that high school. And if you go back even further, we've had a governor of the state of Indiana, Clifford Townsend, was from Blackford County. So when you think about it, there's been some great things that have come through Blackford County, and I went through the schools, and I think that I did okay. I'm confident in my kids going through the school system here. I just think, I hope that people understand that this is a good community. There's a lot of positives, and the school system, it's like, I guess, like anything else, you get what you put into it. If you put into it, you listen to the teachers, you're going to do fine. And I think people like Kevin Ford are proof that, yeah, you'll be fine. It's just, again, I can't stress enough, just kind of, you put the work in and you're going to be fine. And there's been some great people that have come through Blackford County, and just a wonderful place to grow up and to live.
You mentioned the sports aspect of it. And when my kids started playing sports, I remember we'd go do the T-ball tournament, and we'd go over to Wabash. And before we even got over there, our kids were saying, well, we're just Blackford, and Wabash is going to whoop up on us anyway. So why are we coming here? And I heard parents saying the same thing. Why are we coming here? They're just going to clobber us anyway. We're Blackford. And it kind of like drove a dagger in your heart, because, I didn't grow up here, but it didn't take me long to go, hey, this is not right. You guys should be, if you can't win those games, you should be working harder and getting better so that you could. And I remember a guy getting a hold of me by the name of Ryan Heaston. And he said, these kids should not be saying we're from Blackford. They should be saying, hey, we're from Blackford, and we're going to kick your in this sport. And I remember him taking this group of 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds and molding them and saying, you're no longer just from Blackford. You're from Blackford, and you need to be proud of it. And when you go to a basketball game, a baseball game, a football game, it doesn't matter. When someone says, we're just going to Blackford, you tell them, yeah, right, you're coming to Blackford, and we're going to be here to take care of business. And I think you started seeing that a couple years ago with those kids. They didn't have that mentality of, oh, we're from Blackford. They had that mentality of, hey, we're from Blackford, and you're going to respect us one way or the other. And I think that's part of the success that started coming here to Blackford, is all due to one guy going, hey, we got to change these kids' mentality from saying, yeah, we're from Blackford, to saying we're from Blackford, and having a little pride in it. And you're absolutely right. You're going to be just fine coming from Blackford.
Yep, I agree with you.
So with that, you have any last words? Any saved thoughts that you want to get out?
Oh, I'm afraid if I do, we'll end up talking for another 2 or 3 hours, because I think you and I know each other well enough that we could just chew on the fat, like they say, for quite some time. But no, this has been enjoyable, and I hope people enjoy it as well. And um, I, I guess I just can't say any more than I'm from Blackford.
That's right. And with that, JD, we're going to cut this one short, and hopefully the Blackford faithful will want us to do a show together, a weekly show together, and hopefully they'll enjoy it. What say you?
I hope they respond. I hope they respond positively, and even more importantly, if they do and we do it, that they enjoy it, and we're not boring, and we can ride the tails in the old herd charisma, and put out an enjoyable product that is both educational and entertaining.
I like it. So on that, we're going to stop this broadcast, and we'll see you guys for the next